Cigarettes are a modern invention, but smoking? Smoking is ancient. And the story of what humans were actually burning, inhaling, and gathering around long before paper-wrapped tobacco rolls existed is stranger and more fascinating than most people expect. This video is about what ancient humans actually smoked before cigarettes existed, not in a way that promotes anything. In a here's what the archaeology and the science actually say way, which turns out to be genuinely surprising. Because some of the evidence is thousands of years old, found in desert fire pits, mountain cemeteries, and stone pipes. And it tells a story about smoke that has almost nothing to do with the cigarette you'd recognize today. So let's go through it, region by region, plant by plant, from the oldest known evidence of tobacco use all the way to how the modern cigarette eventually changed everything. The first thing worth understanding is that cigarettes are actually very new. The paper-wrapped tobacco roll that most people picture when they think of smoking only became a mass-produced product after 1880, when a man named James Bonsack patented a machine that could churn out cigarettes at industrial speed. Before that machine, cigarettes were hand-rolled, expensive, and not widely used. And before that era entirely, people who smoked used pipes, cigars, rolled leaves, or simply sat near burning plants in ritual fires. Ancient smoking did not look anything like pulling a cigarette from a packet. The tools were different, the plants were different, and in most cultures, the reasons were completely different too. So what were they actually smoking? The oldest direct evidence we have points to tobacco, but not in the Americas, you might imagine, from cowboy films or colonial-era paintings. We're talking about a site in Utah called the Wishbone site, where archaeologists found burnt tobacco seeds in an ancient hearth context dating back around 12,300 years. That's more than 10,000 years before cigarettes existed. Now, it's worth being careful here, because burnt seeds tell us tobacco was present and being burned near fire, but the exact method isn't always certain. It could involve chewing, burning, or smoking. But the key point is that people in North America were already interacting with tobacco near ancient campfires at a time when agriculture hadn't even begun in most of the world. Before cigarettes, before cigars, before any of it, there were hunter-gatherers sitting around hearths with tobacco seeds in the ash. But tobacco wasn't the only thing ancient people were smoking, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting. In 2019, researchers announced evidence of cannabis being burned for its fumes in a 2,500-year-old cemetery in the Pamir Mountains of western China at a site called the Jirzhangkal Cemetery. They found ancient wooden braziers, burned stones, and clear chemical traces of cannabis with higher-than-wild concentrations of the psychoactive compound THC. And the setting matters here. This wasn't casual use. This was a funeral or ceremonial context. People gathered around ritual fires in a mountain cemetery, and the smoke that rose from those braziers was part of something deliberate and meaningful. Some ancient smoke was directly connected to death, ceremony, and altered states of consciousness in ways that were clearly intentional and culturally significant. That's worth pausing on, because it reframes the whole picture. Before smoke became a habit, it may have been a message. And that idea runs through almost every ancient culture you look at. In the ancient Near East and Mediterranean world, aromatic resins and plants were burned in temples and ritual spaces for thousands of years. Frankincense, myrrh, and other plant-based incense were used in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and across the ancient world not as something people inhaled casually, but as something that marked sacred space, connected the living to the dead, or carried offerings upward toward gods and ancestors. Smoke rises. It's visible, but untouchable. It changes the smell and atmosphere of a place in a way that nothing else quite does. To ancient people, that was powerful. Smoke wasn't just combustion. It was atmosphere, signal, medicine, and mystery. So if you map it out by region, the picture looks something like this. In the Americas, the oldest evidence points to tobacco being used near ancient hearths, and later, pipes became one of the main methods. Archaeologists have actually studied residue inside ancient stone pipes from hunter-gatherer communities in northwestern North America using biomolecular analysis, and they found direct chemical evidence of tobacco and other native plants being smoked. In Central Asia, The Jersenkal Cemetery gives us clear evidence of cannabis being burned in ritual contexts around 2,500 years ago. In the ancient Mediterranean and Near East, aromatic resins and incense dominated, burned in vessels and temple settings. And across Africa and Eurasia, local plants were burned in various ritual contexts, though the evidence varies significantly by region and time period. The honest answer is that there was no single thing ancient humans smoked. They burned what grew locally. Before global trade routes, before tobacco became a worldwide commodity, smoke was regional. What you burned depended entirely on where you lived and what your culture had developed around the plants available to you. And the reasons people burned plants were just as varied as the plants themselves. Ritual and ceremony come up again and again in the archaeological record. So does healing, because many ancient cultures used smoke in medicinal traditions, believing certain plants could treat illness or ward off disease. Social bonding was part of it too, especially in ceremonial pipe traditions in the Americas, where shared smoking carried deep cultural and diplomatic meaning. Some researchers also suggest that burning certain plants near living spaces may have helped control insects, which would have been a very practical reason to keep smoke going near a camp. Fire had already changed human life in profound ways. Smoke was just another layer of that world, and humans kept discovering that different plants created different smells, different effects, and different meanings. What the cigarette did was take all of that history and flatten it into something portable, cheap, and addictive. The Bonsack machine made cigarettes easy to mass produce. Companies made them easy to buy. And through the 20th century, cigarette consumption exploded in ways that had nothing to do with ritual or ceremony and everything to do with marketing, addiction, and convenience. The cigarette didn't invent smoking. It industrialized it. And in doing so, it turned something that had been slow, local, and ceremonial for thousands of years into one of the biggest public health problems in modern history. So, to actually answer the question, before cigarettes existed, ancient humans smoked and burned tobacco in the Americas, cannabis in some Central Asian ritual contexts, aromatic resins and incense in ancient temples and ceremonies, and various local plants depending on where they lived and what their culture had developed. The oldest tobacco use evidence goes back around 12,300 years. The clearest ancient cannabis burning evidence comes from around 2,500 years ago in Western China, and the modern cigarette only became a mass-produced product after 1880. The story of smoking is much older, much stranger, and much more cultural than most people realize. It starts not with a cigarette packet but with a fire pit, a handful of seeds, and a group of people who noticed that certain plants, when they burned, did something interesting to the air around them. If you found this genuinely interesting, subscribe to the channel because I got some really amazing curiosity-driven videos coming your way.